The concrete truck rumbled to a stop in front of Margaret Wilkinson's pristine colonial home, its mixer churning noisily as workers began extending the chute toward her backyard. She stood on her porch, arms folded across her chest, a smile of defiance playing across her lips as her neighbor Patricia Foster, known throughout Sunny Meadows as HOA Karen, came sprinting across the perfectly manicured communal lawn, waving a sheaf of covenant papers, her face twisted in outrage. "Stop! Stop right now!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking as she nearly tripped over a garden gnome. "That is not an approved structure. The board explicitly denied your application." Margaret really sipped her mimosa, watching as the first pour of concrete began forming the outline of what would become the neighborhood's most controversial home addition. Patricia Foster had ruled Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association for 8 years with the iron fist of bureaucratic tyranny. At 53, she'd weaponized bylaws the way generals deployed armies, using regulation arcana to bend the community to her aesthetic vision. Her personal crusades were legendary: the Williams family's unapproved birdhouse, 2 inches taller than regulation, the Chang's mailbox, insufficiently traditional, and most recently, her magnum opus of pettiness, denying the Wilkinsons' modest above-ground pool during a record-breaking heatwave. "You know perfectly well the board rejected your pool application," Patricia hissed, brandishing the papers. Section 7, Paragraph 4. No recreational water features exceeding 3 feet in depth without express written approval. Margaret's eyes sparkled. "Oh, this isn't a pool, Patricia." "What? Then what exactly?" "It's a historically accurate Roman bathhouse and spa complex." Margaret handed Patricia a thick binder, complete with tepagarium, caldarium, and frigidarium, all extensively documented as educational historical architecture, which is specifically permitted under Section 12, Paragraph 9. Educational architectural features celebrating historical design. Patricia's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as she flipped through pages of architectural drawings, historical references, and most devastatingly, highlighted copies of her own precious HOA covenant annotated with meticulous legal precision. "You can't do this," Patricia finally sputtered. "Already am," Margaret replied, gesturing to the workers now laying rebar. "I've submitted all required documentation. The county has approved permits. And unlike pools, historical architectural reproductions don't require HOA approval if they meet educational criteria." Patricia's face flushed crimson. "This is a deliberate circumvention off. You denied my family a simple pool during a 104-degree heat wave because it disrupted neighborhood aesthetic harmony. My children were literally suffering while you worried about property values." Margaret's voice remained casual, but her eyes had hardened. "So yes, I found another way." Patricia stormed off, clutching the binder like evidence in a crime scene, but her mind was already racing. This wasn't just about one unauthorized structure. This was insurrection. Margaret Wilkinson had found a loophole, and if one homeowner could defy Patricia's authority, others might follow. The very fabric of Sunny Meadows, her Sunny Meadows, would unravel. By nightfall, Patricia had called an emergency HOA board meeting. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her papers at the head of the conference table in the community center. She built this kingdom meticulously, cultivating allies, intimidating opponents, memorizing every clause and subcategory of the covenant. She would not be outmaneuvered by some newcomer with a fancy binder and a rebellious streak. As board members filed in, Patricia straightened her posture. This wasn't just about a bathhouse. This was war. Patricia Foster had not slept. Her normally immaculate appearance, which she considered as much a part of her authority as her title of HOA president, showed subtle signs of disarray. A stray wisp of highlighted hair, slightly smudged mascara, a wrinkle in her otherwise crisp blouse. She'd spent the night combing through the 300-page Sunny Meadows covenant looking for ammunition. "This is unprecedented," she told the 6 other board members gathered around her dining room table. Coffee cups and pastries sat untouched as she paced. "The Wilkinson situation isn't just a violation, it's a calculated attack on our authority." Roger Simmons, the board treasurer and Patricia's most reliable ally, adjusted his glasses. "Technically, she's exploiting a loophole rather than violating a rule. I've reviewed her documentation. It's thorough." Patricia shot him a look that could wither synthetic turf. "Whose side are you on, Roger?" "I'm simply stating facts," he replied, raising his hands defensively. "The educational architecture exemption was added during the historical preservation push 3 years ago. You drafted that amendment yourself. It was meant for historically appropriate shutters and period-correct porch columns." Patricia slammed her palm on the table. "Not a full Roman bath complex with," she consulted her notes, "tepagarium, whatever that is. It's a warm bathing room in ancient Roman baths," offered Diane Jackson, the newest board member. When everyone turned to stare at her, she shrugged. "I looked it up." Patricia took a steadying breath. 8 years of meticulous community control was unraveling because of one stubborn woman who couldn't accept that above-ground pools were tacky. She denied 15 pool applications during her tenure, all without incident. Residents typically sulked, then complied. What made Margaret Wilkinson different? Here's what we're going to do, Patricia announced, switching to her problem-solving voice. First, we issue a cease and desist based on improper notification protocol. Second, we call an emergency covenant review to close this loophole. Third, we document any and all construction violations. What Patricia didn't share was her fourth strategy already in motion. She'd spent the morning calling in favors from her husband's college roommate at the county permit office. A surprise inspection would find something. There was always something. By noon, Patricia was parked across from the Wilkinson house in her white Lexus SUV, documenting every truck that arrived, every worker who failed to wear proper safety equipment, every minute they worked past permitted hours. Her dashboard had become a command center. Camera, notebook, covenant binder, and a pair of binoculars she borrowed from her husband's bird-watching supplies. She was so engrossed in her surveillance that she didn't notice Margaret approaching until a tap on her window made her jump. "Taking up wildlife photography, Patricia?" Margaret asked pleasantly, gesturing to the binoculars. "Or just spying?" Patricia rolled down her window with dignity. "Monitoring covenant compliance is my responsibility as board president." Of course, Margaret nodded sympathetically. "Must be exhausting, carrying the weight of proper shutter colors and mailbox heights on your shoulders. Would you like to come see the construction?" The foreman's explaining the historical accuracy of Roman hypocaust heating systems. Fascinatingly educational. Patricia bristled at the mockery. "I've reviewed enough to know this project violates the spirit of our community standards." "The spirit?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were all about the letter of the law, Patricia. Isn't that why my children couldn't have a simple pool during a heat advisory? Because it violated Section 7, Paragraph 4, not the spirit, but the exact wording?" For the first time in years, Patricia felt outmaneuvered. She started her car engine. "This isn't over, Margaret." "Oh, I know," Margaret smiled. "The caldarium walls are just going up tomorrow. Wait until you see the mosaic tile delivery on Thursday. It's coming all the way from Italy. Educational authenticity doesn't come cheap." As Patricia drove away, her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. No one had ever challenged her like this. No one had ever made her feel powerless in her own neighborhood. Patricia's emergency covenant review meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Sunny Meadows Community Center. She pulled strings to secure the space on short notice, displacing the weekly senior citizens bingo night, earning her several glares as the elderly residents reluctantly packed up their daubers and cards. "We need to maintain order," she explained to her increasingly uncomfortable board members as they set up chairs. "Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good." Attendance was unprecedented. Word of the Roman Bath Rebellion, as residents were now calling it, had spread through the neighborhood with the speed of spilled wine on white carpet. Nearly 60 homeowners crowded into the room designed for 40, with more peering through windows from outside. Patricia took her position at the podium, the laminated Robert's Rules of Order prominently displayed beside her. She'd worn her power suit, navy blue with subtle pinstripes, and applied an extra coat of mascara. Appearances mattered, especially when authority was under threat. This emergency session will address a critical covenant loophole that threatens the aesthetic harmony and property values of Sunny Meadows, she began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I move to amend Section 12, Paragraph 9 to specify that educational architectural features must not exceed standard accessory structure dimensions as outlined in Section 4. Before anyone could second the motion, Margaret Wilkinson raised her hand. She'd arrived early, claiming a front row seat with military precision. "Point of order," Margaret said calmly. "According to Article 3 of the HOA bylaws, covenant amendments require 14 days written notice to all homeowners before they can be discussed at a general meeting." Patricia's smile tightened. "This is an emergency review session." "There's no provision for emergency amendment reviews in our bylaws," Margaret replied, holding up her own laminated copy. "I've highlighted the relevant sections for everyone's convenience." She began passing copies to nearby residents. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Patricia felt her carefully constructed control slipping. She tried a different approach. "We're not amending tonight, merely discussing potential amendments." Her tone remained pleasant, though her eyes had narrowed to dangerous slits, "and discussing a clear case of covenant circumvention that affects us all." "If we're just discussing," a voice called from the back, "I'd like to discuss why my shade tree request was denied last summer while the Fosters have 3 oak trees that exceed height restrictions." Patricia froze. It was David Chen, whose landscaping variance she rejected twice. "That's not relevant to tonight's agenda." Patricia responded, her voice rising slightly. Another hand shot up. I'd like to discuss why board elections have been postponed twice in the past year, called Samantha Williams, whose Halloween decorations had earned her 3 violation notices the previous October. The meeting was derailing faster than Patricia could redirect it. Years of accumulated resentment from denied requests, nitpicking violation notices, and selective enforcement were bubbling to the surface, catalyzed by Margaret's bold defiance. "We need to focus," Patricia insisted, tapping her gavel sharply. "This is about the Wilkinson situation specifically." "Actually," Margaret interjected, "since we can't amend bylaws tonight anyway, perhaps we should use this opportunity for a broader discussion. I move we establish a covenant review committee to examine inconsistencies in enforcement." She smiled pleasantly. "For educational purposes." Patricia watched in horror as hands rose throughout the room, seconding Margaret's motion. The very meeting she called to consolidate her power was transforming into a referendum on her leadership. She made one final desperate attempt. "The Wilkinson Project will reduce all of your property values. That affects everyone in this room." Roger Simmons cleared his throat. "Actually, I consulted a real estate agent about that claim. Unique architectural features like historical reproductions often increase adjacent property values by 3 to 5% when executed with quality materials." Patricia stared at her most loyal ally, utterly betrayed. The room had grown louder, residents now freely discussing years of HOA grievances. She banged her gavel repeatedly, but no one seemed to notice or care. In that moment, Patricia realized she was facing more than a bathhouse rebellion. She was facing a full-scale community mutiny. By Saturday morning, Patricia's kitchen table had disappeared beneath stacks of documents: covenant binders, meeting minutes from the past 5 years, violation notices, architectural review applications, and a fresh legal pad filled with increasingly desperate strategies. Her husband, Warren, watched with growing concern as she made her 3rd pot of coffee before noon. "Patty," he ventured cautiously, using the nickname she normally forbade, "don't you think this is getting a bit obsessive?" Patricia didn't look up from the county code regulations she was highlighting. "When leadership is challenged, Warren, decisive action is required." "It's just a backyard project," he said gently. Her head snapped up. "It is not just a backyard project, it's anarchy." She stabbed her finger at a stack of papers. 3 variance requests filed yesterday. 3 for projects previously denied. The Andersons want to paint their front door teal. Teal. Warren. The Rodriguez family has already ordered materials for a pergola that exceeds height restrictions by 8 inches. And the Clarks. Her voice cracked slightly. The Clarks are planting a vegetable garden in their front yard. Warren blinked. "Is that bad?" "It's against Section 8, Paragraph 17. Food cultivation limited to rear yards only." Patricia's hands trembled slightly. "Don't you see? Margaret Wilkinson isn't just building a ridiculous bathhouse, she's dismantling the very fabric of our community standards." Warren opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by Patricia's phone buzzing. She pounced on it, scanned the message, and let out a triumphant "Ha." "What is it?" he asked. "My contact at the county permit office," she replied, already gathering her purse and keys. "The inspector found 3 code violations at the Wilkinson construction site. Work is suspended pending review." She was practically vibrating with vindication. "I'm going over there now." "Patty, it's Saturday. Maybe wait until—" But she was already gone, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the live, laugh, love sign she hung in the entryway. Patricia drove the 4 blocks to the Wilkinson house with the focused intensity of a general advancing on a critical battlefield. She'd applied fresh lipstick at a stop sign, war paint for the confrontation ahead. As she rounded the corner, she saw exactly what she'd hoped for. Construction workers packing up tools, a notice taped to a partially built wall, and Margaret Wilkinson engaged in intense conversation with a man holding a clipboard. Patricia parked directly in front of the house and emerged from her SUV with barely suppressed glee. "Is there a problem with the project, Margaret?" she called, approaching with measured steps. Margaret turned, her expression unnervingly calm. "Patricia, what surprised to see you here." "I was just passing by," Patricia lied smoothly. "Noticed the work stoppage. Permit issues?" "Minor discrepancies," Margaret replied, already being addressed. The inspector, a balding man with a sunburned neck, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, are you involved with this project?" "Patricia Foster, Sunny Meadows HOA president," she announced, extending her hand with official gravitas. "Right," he nodded, checking his clipboard. "You're the one who's called our office 11 times this week." Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "I was merely expressing community concerns about potential code violations." "Ah," he turned back to Margaret. "As I was saying, Mrs. Wilkinson, once your contractor submits the revised drainage plans, work can resume. Shouldn't take more than a day or 2 to process." Patricia's triumph evaporated. "But the violations—" "Minor adjustments to the water drainage system," Margaret explained. Nothing structural, nothing safety-related. But the stop work order is standard procedure during plan revisions. The inspector finished, clearly eager to end the conversation. "Have a good weekend, ladies." As he walked to his truck, Patricia felt her carefully orchestrated victory crumbling. "This isn't over," she said, her voice lacking its usual authority. "Actually, Patricia," Margaret replied, her tone almost sympathetic, "I think it might be." The community meeting made it clear that people are tired of micromanagement. The review committee is already examining past enforcement inconsistencies. "Enforcement of rules we all agreed to when buying these homes," Patricia protested. "Rules that have been applied selectively," Margaret countered. "Did you know your own gazebo exceeds square footage limits by nearly 20%? The committee found the variance you granted yourself last year. Interesting how that worked out." Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. Her gazebo had indeed required a special exemption, one she pushed through during a sparsely attended summer meeting. "That was different," she stammered. "Was it?" Margaret asked. "The committee doesn't think so. In fact, they're recommending a full audit of all board decisions from the past 2 years." For the first time in 8 years of HOA presidency, Patricia felt truly cornered. Her power, built on intimidation, selective enforcement, and procedural manipulation, was dissolving like sugar in rain. She retreated to her car without another word, her mind racing through what she always considered unthinkable, the nuclear option. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the Sunny Meadows annual community brunch. In previous years, Patricia had overseen every detail of this flagship HOA event. The exact shade of tablecloths, cornflower blue, not navy, the precise arrangement of the mimosa bar, a carefully curated playlist of inoffensive instrumental music. This year, she'd surrendered control to the social committee, claiming a family emergency. The truth was far more strategic. Patricia Foster was preparing to deploy her ultimate weapon. At precisely 10:17 a.m., as residents mingled over Belgian waffles on the community lawn, a black Lincoln Town car with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The driver, a stone-faced woman in a charcoal suit, opened the rear door, and out stepped a slim man with silver hair and a leather portfolio. Patricia emerged from her house moments later, as if by coincidence, and approached the man with a handshake that lingered just long enough to be noticed. "Mr. Harrington," she said loudly enough for nearby residents to hear. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Heads turned. Conversations paused. The name Harrington rippled through the gathering like a pebble dropped in still water. Everyone in Sunny Meadows knew of Victor Harrington, the ruthless property attorney whose specialty was covenant enforcement and whose reputation for bankrupting homeowners with legal fees was legendary in 3 counties. Patricia guided him toward the Wilkinson property, making sure to walk the perimeter of the brunch, ensuring maximum visibility. Her message was clear: cross Patricia Foster and you'll face the Harrington consequences. Margaret, serving punch at the drinks table, watched the performance with narrowed eyes. For 20 minutes, Patricia and Harrington surveyed the bathhouse construction, taking photos, making notes, and speaking in hushed tones that somehow carried just enough for observers to catch ominous fragments, litigation potential and substantial damages, and precedent-setting case. When they finished their inspection, Patricia escorted Harrington back to his car and approached the brunch with renewed confidence, helping herself to a mimosa. "Beautiful day for community togetherness, isn't it?" she announced to no one in particular. Roger Simmons sidled up beside her. "Victor Harrington, Patricia. Really?" "The board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect covenant integrity," she replied smoothly. "Sometimes that requires specialized legal counsel." "The board didn't authorize retaining Harrington," Roger countered, his voice low but intense. "This is going too far." Patricia sipped her drink. "As president, I have emergency powers to consult experts when necessary." "You have a petty vendetta because someone found a loophole in your precious rules," Roger hissed. "And now you're threatening to bankrupt a family over a bathhouse." Patricia blinked, genuinely surprised by his vehemence. "I'm enforcing standards we all agreed to. That's my job." "Your job is to serve the community, not terrorize it." Roger shook his head. "I can't support this. Neither will the other board members." "You don't need to," Patricia replied, her voice hardening. "Harrington works directly for me now." Roger stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'd personally retain him," she admitted. "If the board won't protect Sunny Meadows, I will." The implications hung between them. Patricia Foster, who had spent 8 years weaponizing HOA bylaws, was now prepared to weaponize her personal wealth against a neighbor over a construction project. Roger walked away without another word. Within minutes, the brunch's atmosphere had chilled noticeably. Residents gathered in small clusters, glancing toward Patricia, with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright hostility. Only Margaret seemed unfazed. She continued serving punch, chatting pleasantly with residents who now approached her with supportive touches on the arm and conspiratorial whispers. By early afternoon, Patricia sat alone at a table meant for 8, surrounded by empty chairs and half-eaten pastries. The social isolation was new and disorienting. For years, her position had guaranteed a certain deferential respect. Residents might fear her, but they acknowledged her authority. Now, as she watched Margaret laughing with a group that included 3 board members, Patricia realized her nuclear auction had detonated in her own hands. Her phone buzzed with a text from Warren. "Coming home soon? You've been gone for hours." She didn't reply. Home meant facing Warren's gentle disapproval, his increasing concern about her fixation. Out here, even in isolation, she could maintain the fiction that she was still fighting for principles rather than pride. As the cleanup crew began dismantling tables, Patricia remained seated, watching the community she ruled for nearly a decade function perfectly well without her direction. The revelation was both humiliating and oddly freeing. For the first time since the Roman bathhouse crisis began, Patricia Foster wondered if she might be on the wrong side of history. The thought terrified her. 2 weeks passed. Patricia's lawn, typically the neighborhood gold standard, showed subtle signs of neglect. A dandelion here, slight browning there. The symbolic deterioration wasn't lost on observers. While Patricia Foster's attention remained fixated on litigation strategy, the very standards she championed were slipping at her own property. Inside her home office, legal documents covered every surface. Victor Harrington's retainer had cost $15,000. A fact Warren discovered only when the credit card statement arrived. Their subsequent argument had been brief but devastating, ending with Warren moving into the guest room and communicating via terse notes left on the kitchen counter. "This is an investment in community standards," Patricia had insisted. "This is an obsession," Warren had replied before closing the guest room door. Now, preparing for the special board meeting scheduled for that evening, Patricia reviewed her presentation one final time. Harrington had identified 7 potential legal challenges to the Wilkinson project. The most promising involved an obscure clause about historical accuracy. Margaret's tepidarium design apparently featured a window configuration that wouldn't have existed in authentic Roman architecture. Patricia's phone rang, displaying Harrington's number. She answered immediately. "I've reviewed the additional materials you sent," he began without preamble. "There's a complication." Patricia's stomach tightened. "What kind of complication?" "Mrs. Wilkinson has retained counsel, Catherine Diaz." Patricia recognized the name instantly. Catherine Diaz was a property rights attorney known for dismantling overreaching HOAs and for her willingness to countersue board members personally. "So," Patricia's voice sounded brittle even to her own ears, "we have solid grounds for—" "Mrs. Foster," Harrington interrupted, "I must advise caution. Diaz has submitted documentation proving the historical accuracy of every design element, including the window configuration we questioned. She's also compiled extensive evidence of selective enforcement within Sunny Meadows. Meaning if we proceed, the court will likely examine every decision you've made as HOA president. Every variance granted to friends, every violation overlooked for board members, every rejection issued to less favored residents." The implications were clear. Patricia's reign had not been without favoritism. Furthermore, Harrington continued, Diaz has indicated willingness to pursue personal liability claims against board members who supported frivolous litigation. "They can't do that," Patricia protested. "Actually, they can. And given the documentation they've assembled, they might succeed." His voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Foster, as your attorney, I strongly advise against proceeding with this case." After the call ended, Patricia sat motionless, staring at the wall. $15,000 spent, and her own attorney was backing down. Outside her window, she could see construction had resumed on the bathhouse. Workers moved efficiently, installing what appeared to be intricate tile work around the main entrance. The doorbell rang. Patricia ignored it, but it rang again more insistently. With a sigh, she made her way to the entrance. Margaret Wilkinson stood on her porch, holding a folder. "What do you want?" Patricia asked flatly. "May I come in?" "Just for a few minutes." Against her better judgment, Patricia stepped aside. They settled in the living room, the tension palpable. "I think we need to talk about where this is going," Margaret began. "Before the board meeting tonight. If this is some attempt to intimidate me with your fancy lawyer—" "It's not," Margaret interrupted gently. "It's about finding a way forward that doesn't destroy the neighborhood, or you." Patricia blinked. "Destroy me?" "Patricia, I've lived here for 3 years. I've watched you run this community like your personal kingdom, but I've also seen your genuine love for this neighborhood." Margaret leaned forward. "This crusade against my project isn't just about rules anymore. It's consuming you." Patricia wanted to object, but the evidence surrounded them, the neglected lawn, illegal papers swamping her office, Warren's empty chair at the dining table. The board is planning to call for your resignation tonight, Margaret continued. They've lost confidence in your judgment. The words hit like physical blows. They wouldn't dare. They would, and they will. Margaret's voice remained calm, but there's another option. She opened her folder and withdrew several pages of professionally drafted documents. What is this? Patricia asked. Compromise. My lawyer and I drafted it this morning. Margaret handed over the papers. The community establishes a new architectural innovation committee to evaluate creative projects that may technically comply with but extend beyond traditional interpretations of the covenant. You would chair this committee. Patricia frowned. Why would you offer me any position after all this? Because despite everything, you know this neighborhood better than anyone. You care about its character and quality. You've just become rigid in how you define those things. Margaret's expression softened. And because I think you need a graceful exit from this conflict. For the first time in weeks, Patricia felt something shift inside her. A loosening of the knot that had formed the moment that concrete truck arrived. The offer represented both victory and defeat, recognition and limitation. I'll need to review these terms carefully, she said finally. Margaret nodded. Of course. The board meeting's not until 7. She stood to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I think you've been a dedicated president. Sunny Meadows is beautiful because of your efforts. But communities need to evolve, and so do their leaders. After Margaret left, Patricia sat with the documents, reading each clause carefully. The proposal was fair, more than fair. It acknowledged her expertise while restricting her unilateral authority. It preserved standards while creating space for innovation. Most importantly, it offered a path back to community respect that didn't require total surrender. Patricia picked up her phone and for the first time in weeks dialed Warren's number. I need your advice, she said when he answered, about finding a compromise. 6 months later, Patricia Foster stood before the mosaic tile entrance of what the Wilkinsons now officially called the Therme, Latin for bathhouse, admiring the craftsmanship despite herself. The project had been completed 2 months earlier and had indeed become something of a neighborhood sensation. Home values in Sunny Meadows had increased by an average of 4.3%, a statistic Patricia had personally verified through 3 different real estate analyses. The tile work really is exceptional, she admitted to Margaret, who stood beside her. The artisans captured the Pompeian style beautifully. High praise indeed from the chair of the Architectural Innovation Committee, Margaret replied with a smile that held no trace of mockery. Patricia adjusted her new tortoiseshell glasses, part of the softer image she cultivated since the committee's formation. Well, it meets all the historical accuracy standards. I can't argue with meticulous research. They were conducting the final approval inspection for the Therme's inclusion in the Riverside County Historical Homes Tour, a development that would bring positive publicity to Sunny Meadows and, ironically, further increase property values. Inside, the completed bathhouse was a marvel of historical recreation. Warm wooden changing rooms, a series of heating chambers built using authentic hypocaust technology, and 3 bathing pools of varying temperatures. Educational placards explained Roman bathing customs and architectural innovations. Local schools had already scheduled field trips. The committee has unanimously approved inclusion in the tour, Patricia announced, signing the final form with a flourish. Congratulations. What she didn't say, what didn't need saying, was how much had changed in 6 months. The nuclear option had never been deployed. Victor Harrington had been dismissed, though not before collecting his non-refundable retainer. The board had accepted the compromise proposal establishing the Architectural Innovation Committee with Patricia as chair. Her resignation as HOA president had followed naturally, presented as a decision to focus on specialized leadership rather than the face-saving measure it truly was. The neighborhood had elected Diane Jackson, the Roman bath history enthusiast, as the new president, ushering in a more collaborative governance approach. Most importantly, Warren had moved back into their bedroom, their marriage slowly healing as Patricia's obsession with control gradually loosened its grip. Will you and Warren be attending the neighborhood cookout this weekend? Margaret asked as they exited the bathhouse. He mentioned you might be out of town. The casual reference to conversation between their husbands still felt strange to Patricia. The men had discovered a shared passion for craft beer and now met monthly with other neighbors for brewing sessions, a hobby that would have been impossible under the old covenant, which had forbidden manufacturing activities in residential areas. We'll be there, Patricia confirmed. We're just driving to Lakeside Saturday for their architectural tour. Research for the committee. They parted ways at the sidewalk. As Patricia walked home, she noticed details of her neighborhood that her rulebook fixation had previously obscured. The Williams daughter proudly showing friends the birdhouse her father had built, now 2 inches taller than regulation. The vibrant colors of the Rodriguez family's pergola, where neighbors gathered for weekend coffees, the Clark family's front yard vegetable garden, now a model of both productivity and aesthetics that had inspired a neighborhood-wide victory garden movement. Sunny Meadows had changed, evolved, as Margaret had put it. So had Patricia. She still sent violation notices, old habits died hard, but now they came with offers of assistance and suggestions for creative solutions. The committee reviewed more approvals than rejections. Her reputation had shifted from HOA Karen to stickler for quality, a distinction she found she could live with. At home, Patricia found Warren on their back porch, comparing paint swatches for the garden shed renovation they'd planned for spring. "How's the bathhouse?" he asked, making room for her on the bench. "Educational," she replied with a small smile. "Historically accurate and genuinely impressive." High praise from Patricia Foster, he teased gently. She shrugged. "I can appreciate quality, even when it comes in unexpected forms." Speaking of unexpected, Warren said, sliding a folder toward her. "The Andersons submitted preliminary plans for their backyard. They're calling it a medieval English cottage garden retreat, complete with a thatched roof gazebo and authentic herb spiral." Patricia raised an eyebrow but opened the folder with genuine curiosity rather than dread. "Educational architecture?" she asked. "Apparently the neighborhood has developed quite an interest in historical recreation," Warren chuckled. "Wonder where they got that idea." As Patricia reviewed the surprisingly well-researched plans, she felt something that had been increasingly common these past months: the satisfaction of helping shape a community rather than simply controlling it. There were still moments, typically around 3 a.m., when she missed the absolute authority she once wielded, when she resented Margaret Wilkinson for catalyzing her downfall, when she drafted mental violation notices for infractions only she could see. But those moments grew fewer as Patricia discovered that leadership could take many forms. The Architectural Innovation Committee had given her a new platform, one based on expertise rather than intimidation, on collaboration rather than control. Margaret had been right. Communities needed to evolve. So did their leaders. And sometimes evolution began with a Roman bathhouse built out of spite and ended with something unexpected: growth, connection, and a neighborhood finally learning to balance rules with living. Patricia closed the Anderson folder and smiled. "Tell them to submit more detailed historical documentation on thatching techniques," she told Warren, "and ask if they consider adding a period-appropriate well. I know someone who can build one at a reasonable cost."